The glass gleamed in the grey light of New York, reflecting the stern face of Richard Campbell. On the 30th floor of a skyscraper on Fifth Avenue, the dry sound of his voice echoed louder than the traffic below. Once again, he fired an employee. It was the fifth in just 2 months. No mistake seemed too small to escape his fury. A badly polished glass, a carpet of invisible dust, every detail turned into a sentence. The smell of expensive coffee mixed with imported perfume permeated the office, but nothing masked the coldness of the man who spoke of dignity as if he were disposable. While his power seemed untouchable, across town, in a simple Brooklyn home, Patricia Costa wiped her tired hands in her worn uniform. The steam from a pot of cheap rice filled the narrow kitchen, and the noise of trains passing by the nearby line reminded her that her life was one of constant struggle. The daughter of immigrants, she supported her elderly mother and carried her brother's medical debts on her shoulders. How many women like her have been invisible, swallowing tears in silence so as not to lose the little they had. But that story would not stay that way. There would be a time when the masks would fall and the truth would come out strongly. And those who watch until the end will see justice being done, secrets exposed, and a transformation capable of changing destinies. Because even the coldest heart can be broken by an unexpected gesture of courage. But before we dive into the heart of this story, I need you to know one thing. There was a moment when a simple cleaning lady, with calloused hands and a pure heart, who always lived in silence, dared to touch the life of a child in such a profound way that nothing would ever be the same. Imagine the scene. In an icy mansion in the Hamptons, Patricia kneels before Emily, a 6-year-old girl, weakened by the fight against cancer, and gently puts a blonde wig on her head. In the reflection of the mirror, the child sees herself as a princess again, and for the first time in months, a real smile sprouts on her lips. But what would happen when the millionaire found out that his employee had broken the strictest rule in the house? It is at this moment that I invite you to walk together with Patricia, because stories like this only come to life when we share the emotion. If this narrative touches your heart, leave your support with a like and subscribe to follow other stories of courage and dignity. This gesture is not just a click. It is like holding Patricia's hand and saying, "You are not alone. We are here with you." The bus pulled up to the side of the tree-lined road leading to the Hamptons, and Patricia got off with her bag on her shoulder. The cold Long Island morning wind cut through his face, bringing the salty smell of the distant sea mixed with the sweet scent of the magnolias that graced the gates of the mansions. When he passed through the Campbell Gate, he felt as if he were crossing into another world. The wrought iron gate opened slowly, creaking like a warning, and ahead appeared the immense mansion, white stone walls, towering columns, windows that shone like mirrors in the sun. Everything seemed impeccable, but the silence was so heavy that it reminded me of a cemetery. Patricia pressed her fingers against the cloth she carried in her bag, as if it were an amulet, and walked along the alley of polished stones. Gardens were pruned to perfect shapes, shrubs cut out as if each leaf had been measured. There was a cold beauty there, a beauty that didn't welcome, only exhibited power. When he crossed the main door, the impact was even greater. The Italian marble in the hall reflected the light from the crystal chandeliers, creating an almost blinding glow. Every detail exuded richness, but none conveyed warmth. The air smelled of wax from imported furniture and fresh flowers that ironically seemed dead in the crystal vase. It was in this environment that Mrs. Harris, the governess, with a stern expression and firm steps, appeared. Her impeccable uniform contrasted with Patricia's modest one. With cold eyes, he evaluated the new candidate from head to toe, as if every hair said whether or not she would be worthy of entering there. He led Patricia into the living room, where Persian rugs covered the floor, and antique paintings looked on like silent witnesses. "Before you begin, you need to know that this house tolerates no failure," said Mrs. Harris, in a firm, almost military voice. Patricia nodded in silence, feeling the weight of each word as if they were stones placed on her shoulders. The housekeeper then established the rules: absolute cleanliness without a single detail out of place, rigid punctuality with no delay of seconds, and the harshest of all, the total ban on interaction with Emily, Richard's daughter. Patricia lowered her eyes, but inside her heart throbbed. What kind of house forbade a child to speak to those around him? The silence that enveloped the room seemed even more oppressive after that order. As Mrs. Harris spoke, Patricia noted the details around her: the immense staircase with the gilded railing, the sweeping corridors lit by colored stained glass windows, and a closed door upstairs from which came an almost imperceptible sound, a knocking toy, perhaps a fallen doll. For a moment he imagined that inside was the girl whom no one could approach. It was at that moment that a twinge went through his chest. She thought of all the times she also felt isolated, invisible, as if her voice had no place. How many women do not know this weight? How many, like her, have had to accept unfair rules in order not to lose the little they had? If this touches you, leave your comment with an "I believe," because it is from this silent pain that the courage that changes destinies is born. The housekeeper led her into the kitchen and showed her the new, folded, fragrant uniform. The fabric still smelled like expensive laundry, but when she put it on, Patricia felt that it was like armor that made her invisible, erasing her identity. Suddenly, it was no longer Patricia, the daughter of immigrants who dreamed of studying nursing. She was just the new cleaning lady of the Campbell mansion. At the end of the tour, Mrs. Harris stopped before her and said in a dry tone, "Mr. Campbell tolerates no mistakes. If you want to keep this job, keep it in your memory. He's fired 5 before you." The phrase echoed like a sentence. Patricia took a deep breath, holding the cloth in her trembling hands, and replied simply, "I just want to work in peace." The housekeeper didn't smile, just nodded and made room for Patricia to begin her first task, cleaning the main hall. As he wiped the glittering railing, the reflection of gold flashed in his eyes like a cruel irony. Every movement seemed to be watched by invisible eyes. The old clock on the wall marked every second in low echoes, reminding her that every mistake could cost her future. However, behind that oppressive silence, there was something more. Patricia felt that the walls hid secrets, that this house held pains that the brightness could not erase. The closed door upstairs seemed like a constant warning, as if inside there was a locked life. And as she cleaned, Patricia couldn't help but wonder, what kind of father forbids his daughter from receiving a simple smile from those who work in his house? Her heart tightened with this doubt, and at the same time a certainty grew within her. That rule would be broken sooner or later, but what Patricia didn't know yet is that that gesture of innocent kindness, when it finally happened, would not only change Emily's life, as well as awaken demons and deep wounds in Richard Campbell's icy heart. Patricia returned home that night with heavy feet and a sore body, but it was as she sat in the small kitchen of her Newark apartment that memory began to speak louder than fatigue. The smell of the rice his mother had left on the stove mixed with the musty old walls, reminding him of a childhood marked by scarcity. He grew up right there, in narrow streets, where police sirens mingled with the laughter of children playing barefoot on the hot summer asphalt. The daughter of Latino immigrants, Patricia learned early on that the world looked at her as someone of lesser value. When she was 15, she took her first job as a cleaner at a supermarket in the city, sweeping the floor at 5 in the morning while classmates were still asleep. At that time, he hid his uniform inside his backpack so that no one would know, but every coin he kept was a grain of hope for his family. His younger brother, Daniel, was in a bicycle accident that nearly cost him his leg, and medical bills became a constant shadow. Patricia was forced to multiply cleaning shifts in restaurants and family homes, washing luxurious bathrooms in neighborhoods where she could never live. It was humiliating, but it was also in this silence that she learned to observe. She noticed the details that no one noticed, listened to conversations that were not addressed to her, and discovered that dignity lies in not letting oneself be corrupted, even when life insists on pushing down. Her biggest dream, kept as a secret, was to study nursing, wear a white coat, and give back to the world what she never received: care. But reality held her hostage, and every time she looked in the mirror, she saw not only the cleaning lady's uniform, but also the invisible marks of those who fight in silence every day. Still, there was a flame in his eyes that neither poverty nor prejudice could extinguish, a discreet but unshakable faith that made her believe that God saw everything, even what men pretended not to see. How many times has she woken up at dawn, staring at the dark ceiling, and wondered if one day her life would have another destiny? How many women like her did not carry on their shoulders the weight of being invisible, but continued to stand because they knew that someone depended on them? At that moment, Patricia closed her eyes and asked in prayer that she be given only what she needed: the strength to continue and the chance to, who knows, transform at least one life. Little did she know that this request would be granted, but in a way that would shake the foundations of Campbell's mansion and expose secrets that no one dared to tell. The mansion's clock struck shortly after 10 o'clock in the morning when Patricia entered the main room to brighten the mahogany furniture that reflected the soft light that came through the silk curtains. The silence of the room was so deep that even the slight drag of the cloth seemed to echo between the icy walls. It was at that moment that she heard a delicate sound, almost a whisper, the sound of dolls being arranged on the Persian carpet, small voices imitating the dialogues of princesses and enchanted castles. When she looked up, Patricia saw her. Emily, a small, pale-skinned girl, in a little pink dress that seemed too big for her fragile body. On his head, nothing but a colourful cap that hid the void left by chemotherapy. Her little eyes, though tired, shone with a sweetness that contrasted with the melancholy of the house. Patricia felt her heart tighten. It was like looking at herself so many years ago, when she also sat alone on the floor trying to make up stories to escape the harshness of life. Emily noticed the presence of the cleaning lady, and for a second the eyes of the two met. There were no words, just a brief shy smile from the child, small but enough to break through the armor of rules and distances that Richard had imposed. Patricia felt the immediate urge to say something, perhaps a simple hello or a question about the dolls. But she swallowed the urge at the same time. Mrs. Harris's words still echoed in her mind. No contact with the girl. He passed the cloth over the table again as if nothing had happened, although his hands trembled slightly. Emily, silent, continued to play. Her dolls staged stories of happy families, but the invented dialogues came out loaded with an early loneliness. "Mom's coming back soon. Wait here. Daddy will play with you later," said the soft voice, repeating phrases that sounded more like wishes than realities. Patricia held her breath, afraid that any sigh would betray the commotion that rose in her chest. No one in the house seemed to notice that girl, but she saw everything. She saw the absence, she saw the pain, she saw the urgent need for affection that no wealth could buy. For a moment she was tempted to kneel on the carpet and show Emily how to braid dolls, but she held back. He wiped an invisible surface, pretending to occupy himself, while his thoughts swirled around a suffocating question. How could anyone live in such luxury and yet leave a child so alone? Emily looked up once more, and before lowering them, she smiled shyly, as if to say, "I know you see me." And it was in this silent gesture that Patricia felt something born that should not exist, a connection. It was like an invisible line that united two souls marked by loneliness. Patricia's heart was beating fast, as if she already sensed that that moment, so small and seemingly harmless, would change the course of everything. Because one day, sooner or later, someone would have to break the rules. And when that happened, what would Richard do when he discovered that the wall he built around his daughter was already beginning to crack for the first time? The sound of footsteps echoing down the marble corridor made Patricia cringe without anyone noticing. Richard Campbell appeared like a towering shadow, his tie perfectly aligned, his icy eyes sweeping every detail of the mansion as if looking for hidden enemies. He did not announce his arrival. It just appeared, and the air in the room seemed to freeze. Patricia, kneeling near the stairs, was finishing polishing the railing when she heard his voice, dry and sharp. "Stop!" The silence fell. The housekeeper, Mrs. Harris, hurried to the side, as if trying to guess the cause of the storm. Richard ran his finger over the railing, lifting it slowly, and against the light there it was, a single speck of dust, insignificant to any human eye, but to him, proof of what he called failure. "Is this what you call cleansing?" The question was not a doubt, it was an attack. His voice reverberated like a blade in the empty hall. Patricia swallowed, kept her eyes down, trying to stay firm. A speck of dust in a 30-room house. "And do you still have the courage to stay here in uniform?" he continued, anger growing. Mrs. Harris tried to intervene, but was cut off with a sudden gesture of her hand. Richard didn't want explanations, he wanted control. "If I tolerate this today, tomorrow my daughter stumbles over your carelessness. In this house, perfection is not optional, it's law." With each word, Patricia's face burned more, not because of the words themselves, but because of the way they were said, in front of others, in front of the housekeeper who tried to hide her embarrassment. It wasn't just a scolding, it was public humiliation, calculated to crush. Patricia felt the tears wanting to overflow, but she held back. "I couldn't lose my job. I couldn't go home with nothing. I couldn't give him that taste." He took a deep breath and stared at the railing, as if that grain were a sentence. Inside her, the knot in her chest grew. How many times had I felt this same shame? Since she was a girl, she heard bosses say that poor people were only good for cleaning up dirt. Ever since she was 15, when a restaurant owner made her scrub the floor 3 times in the same day just to laugh at the effort. It was always like this. Invisible when it did everything right, exposed when a detail escaped. "You're one step away from resignation, Patricia," Richard finished, spitting out his name as if it were a useless burden. "One more mistake and it's out. Understood?" She nodded, her voice stuck, not daring to risk a word that might sound like an excuse. He held on there, standing like a statue, even though inside he was crumbling, and as he slowly returned to his routine, each step felt heavier than the last. Inside her, a thought echoed. How long can someone endure being treated like this and still maintain their dignity? And she went on in silence, carrying that weight that no one saw. And if you're following this story right now, feeling touched by all this, leave a like and subscribe. It is the most beautiful way to show that this pain has not gone unnoticed, that Patricia is not alone in this silence. Back in the hallway, Patricia took up the cloth again, but her hands trembled. Dust, invisible to many, now became an enemy. Mrs. Harris, in silence, only sighed, knowing that any word would be too risky. The house seemed even colder, as if Richard's cruelty had impregnated itself in the walls. Patricia lowered her head and continued, but inside the flame of indignation was already beginning to ignite, because sooner or later, even those who learn to live in silence find a reason to break the silence. And the question that remained in the air was, what would happen on the day that Patricia finally no longer accepted to swallow injustice? The mansion was already plunged into the silence of the night when Patricia discreetly went downstairs to collect a forgotten cloth. The air smelled of freshly applied wax on the wooden floor and the coldness of a space that, despite its luxury, did not know the warmth of a home. It was then that he noticed a small shadow hidden behind the railing. Emily, cowering as if she wanted to disappear, watched in silence as her father sat on the living room couch, poring over reports, talking dryly to the nanny. Richard didn't look at her. He didn't call her by name. He didn't realize that his daughter was there. "Mr. Campbell, the girl has already taken the medicine," the nanny said, and he replied only with an indifferent nod, his eyes glued to the spreadsheets. Emily clutched a hairless doll to her chest with the same fragility that reflected in her own body. Her fingers caressed the smooth head of the toy, and it was in a thin voice, almost a whisper, that Patricia heard her say, "She's just like me, but no one calls her princess." The cleaning lady's heart tightened. An old and familiar pain took over her. That phrase echoed like a universal lament, as if it came from all the children who had ever felt rejected. Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, remembering when she also dreamed of a hug that never came. Deep down, he recognized the weight of that loneliness that cannot be explained in words. Emily remained there, silently, waiting for a look that did not come, and Patricia, invisible as always, was the only witness to that pain. At that moment, she knew that she could not pretend forever, because behind that simple uniform beat a heart that would never accept to see a child believe that he was not worthy of love. But what would happen when the desire to protect Emily was greater than the fear of losing everything? Emily's room smelled of interrupted childhood, a soft mixture of old talcum powder with the faint metallic odor of the medicines that rested on the bedside table. The pink curtains were always closed, leaving only a shy thread of light through the fabric and touching the white wooden furniture. Patricia went in there to make the bed and collect some scattered toys, but it was when she arranged a stack of books that something caught her attention. A wooden box in the corner of the shelf with a half-open lid. Inside, carefully guarded, were dozens of photographs. Emily, still very small, running in a sunny garden, her golden curls swaying in the wind like threads of gold. The open, pure smile carried a life that seemed too far removed from the silent child who now played alone downstairs. Patricia turned another photo carefully. Here was Emily in the arms of a young, radiant woman. The resemblance was undeniable. The same lively eyes, the same light hair. The mother. Patricia's heart sank as she remembered that weeks before, Mrs. Harris had told her about the car accident that took the woman's life. He realized then that Emily had not only lost her hair to the disease, but also the joy that had previously come from her mother's embrace. Each photo was like a silent cry of what no longer existed. Patricia took a deep breath, trying to control her emotion. She felt like an intruder in a universe of memories that didn't belong to her, but at the same time, she couldn't let go of those images. The more he looked, the more he understood the emptiness he saw in Emily's eyes. It wasn't just cancer that had stolen her childhood. It was the absence of someone to remind her every day that she was still special. It was at that moment that Patricia thought something that she had not yet dared to say out loud. Perhaps there was a way to give back to this girl not only the reflection in the mirror, but the feeling of being seen again as a princess. The thought was stored like a small spark that would soon become a flame, and maybe you're feeling it along with Patricia right now, the certainty that the most remarkable moment in this story is yet to come, and that is precisely why every detail matters. When collecting the photos, Patricia let out a tear, quickly wiped with the sleeve of her uniform. He put everything back in the box and arranged it carefully in the same place. But the image of the golden curls and the smile that lit up that girl's life no longer left her mind. That night, as she left the mansion, Patricia walked through the gate with the feeling that she carried an invisible secret in her chest. And the question that throbbed in her heart was inevitable. How far would she have the courage to go to give back to that child the light that had been stolen from her? The dry sound of the frame falling to the floor echoed through the room like thunder amid the silence of the mansion. Patricia bent down quickly, her trembling hands picking up the cracked glass photograph, and it was at that moment that she felt Emily's presence next to her. The girl watched the photo with big eyes, full of memory and longing. "I had long hair like that," he said quietly, touching the image that showed his golden curls in the wind. Patricia swallowed, but couldn't help herself. "You're still a princess, Emily, with or without hair." The girl's shy smile shone like a ray of sunshine in the midst of the storm, but the moment was short-lived. Richard's deep voice came up behind them, freezing the air. "What does that mean?" He strode forward, his eyes flashing with rage. "I made it very clear you should not interact with my daughter, and now I find her here, talking as if she were part of the family." Emily recoiled in fright, hugging her bald doll. But before running, she looked at Patricia and whispered with the courage of someone who doesn't want to lose what little she has. "Thank you for calling me princess." The sentence cut through the silence like a blade, striking Patricia in the heart and leaving Richard visibly shaken, though he hid it behind an even colder mask. "To your room, Emily, now," he ordered, without looking at his daughter. The girl climbed slowly, her small steps carrying the weight of a rejection that no child should have to bear. Patricia remained motionless, the photograph still in hand, as Richard approached, the fury contained in every muscle. "Do you think you're here to give lessons in self-esteem? You're just an employee. Don't forget that." With each word, Patricia felt the lump in her throat grow, but she stood firm, not for herself, but for the image of that girl who had found solace in so few words. It's in this kind of moment that anyone's heart tightens. Because who hasn't felt small in front of someone who had the power to crush us? If this has already touched you, leave a simple "I understand" or "I've been through this" in the comments. It is the most beautiful way to show that this pain is not alone in the world. Richard turned his back as if the conversation was over, but the tension between them remained alive, charged with something even he couldn't control. Patricia, still holding the photo, thought about how much the sincerity of a child could be more powerful than all the rules of a cold man. And the question that hung in the air was clear. How long would Patricia be able to bear this weight before courage spoke louder than fear? That night, the Campbell mansion no longer weighed on Patricia's shoulders, but the silence of her small Newark home seemed even more cruel. The clock was almost midnight when she sat down at the kitchen table, the dim light of the lamp illuminating the open account book before her. Tears flowed discreetly, wetting the scribbled numbers, while his mind could not let go of the scene of the day. Emily climbing the stairs with shuffling steps, muttering "Thank you for calling me princess." Patricia closed her eyes and heard the girl's voice, as if it were there, inside her soul. Suddenly, nothing else mattered. Not the risk of dismissal, not the strict rules, not the fear of punishment. There was something greater than fear, the need to give back to that child a spark of joy. With trembling hands, Patricia opened the old laptop she shared with her brother and began to research. He typed uncertain words. Children's wig, curly blonde hair, Manhattan, costume stores, hair prosthetics. Each click seemed like a transgression. The images appeared on the screen, artificial wigs and others made with human threads, some very expensive, others simpler. She sighed deeply, remembering her own childhood when she dreamed of dresses she could never have. Now it wasn't about vanity, it was about restoring dignity to a girl who believed she didn't deserve to be called a princess. In the drawer, Patricia kept an envelope with some notes saved in months of cleaning and sacrifices. It was money that was supposed to be used to pay off part of her brother's medical debts, but for the first time, she thought of something different, using it for a gesture that might change not only Emily's life, but also her own. He opened the envelope, spread the notes on the table, and felt the weight of the decision. With each bill counted, he remembered the hours of work in silence, the humiliations swallowed, the days when he stopped buying something for himself to save a little more. Now all that effort could turn into a gift that might cost you your job. Patricia got up and went to the bookcase where she kept a small box. Inside were magazine clippings with old dreams, images of hospitals, white coats, the word nursing circled with a blue pen. It was the future he always wanted and that so often seemed impossible. He smiled bitterly. She might never get there, but she could offer Emily something no one had given her, the chance to see herself beautiful again, to believe she was still a princess. The dawn progressed with Patricia browsing websites, noting addresses of stores in Manhattan that sold realistic wigs to children undergoing treatment. She knew she would have to leave early on her day off. brave the crowded subway, and walk through lavish storefronts where elegant women paraded expensive handbags. But none of that mattered. The decision was made. For the first time in weeks, Patricia felt her heart race not with fear, but with courage, because he knew he was about to defy Richard's cruelest rule, that Emily should live distant, silent, and invisible. And the question that burned like wildfire in his mind was clear: what would happen when that millionaire found out that his daughter had smiled again because of a simple cleaning lady? Saturday dawned grey in Newark, but Patricia's heart was beating in a hurry, as if carrying a sun hidden inside it. In the simple fabric bag, tucked under his work clothes, was the small box wrapped in pink paper. The forbidden gift, bought with tears and courage, seemed to weigh more than gold. The train to Long Island shook her tired body, but her eyes saw only the scene that had not yet happened. Emily smiling, spinning in front of a mirror with her hair that had been torn out by her illness. When she arrived at the mansion, Patricia felt the cold of the marble chill her feet as always, but that day there was a detail that strengthened her. Richard had left early for a meeting in Manhattan, and Mrs. Harris was busy in the garden, supervising gardeners who changed the flowers in the main flower bed. The corridor was free, silence, complicit. Emily walked down the stairs slowly, in pink pajamas, holding the bald doll. When he saw Patricia, he smiled with a rare, shy glow, as if he already knew something was about to change. Patricia took a deep breath, called the girl near the sofa, and whispered, "I want to show you something very special." Emily widened her eyes and obeyed, closing them when Patricia asked. With hands that trembled with excitement, she removed the wig from the box, adjusted the blonde curls carefully, and settled them on her smooth head. "Now you can open it." The instant was like a miracle. Emily ran to the large mirror in the room and stopped surprised. Her eyes filled with tears, and then she began to twirl like a ballerina, laughing loudly, her voice echoing through the mansion like a forgotten song. "I'm back to being a princess," she shouted, hugging Patricia with a strength that seemed to come from the soul. The cleaning lady knelt down and wrapped her in her arms, feeling that this moment was worth every sacrifice. "If this piece of Patricia's life can become a mirror or a hug for someone, will you help me carry it forward? Like and subscribe here to the channel. It makes more difference than you think." Emily jumped across the carpet, arranging her curls with her delicate little hands, repeating over and over, "Now Daddy's going to call me princess again, isn't he?" Patricia smiled, but her heart tightened, because he knew that the biggest risk was yet to come. And the question that remained silent was inevitable. What would happen when Richard opened the door and saw his daughter in front of the mirror with the crown of hair he had never allowed? The key turned in the lock, and Patricia felt the blood run cold in her veins. The sound of firm footsteps echoed through the hall before she could even react. Richard was back, hours ahead of schedule. Emily, oblivious to the danger, twirled across the living room carpet, the blonde curls of her wig flying in the air as her clear laughter filled the mansion with a sound that had not been heard in a long time. When the millionaire crossed the door, he stopped as if he had seen a ghost. His eyes moved quickly from his daughter to Patricia and back to his daughter, not believing what he saw. Emily ran up to him, grabbing the hem of her jacket. "Daddy, look how beautiful I look. Can you call me princess again?" The girl's heart beat in every word, waiting for the recognition she so desired. But Richard's face hardened like stone. "Go upstairs to your room, Emily. Now." The girl's joy plummeted in a second. Her shoulders drooped, her eyes watered, but she obeyed in silence, each step slower than the last, until she disappeared up the stairs. Patricia stood alone before him, feeling the weight of the judgment that came like a storm about to collapse. Richard closed the door behind him and approached with a glowing gaze. "What do you think you're doing?" he roared, his voice low but charged with fury. "I have established clear rules. You didn't just break them. You dared to mess with my daughter's head, give false hope, manipulate her fragility." Every word was like a sentence, as if Patricia was a criminal instead of someone who had just tried to bring a little light to a child. She took a deep breath, keeping her posture steady, even though she trembled inside. "I just wanted to return a smile, sir. That's all." Richard laughed, but humorlessly, a cold laugh that cut more than any scream. "A smile? You don't understand anything. You don't know the price that each illusion costs a sick child. Do you think that with a piece of fake hair you can cure what is destroying her life?" Patricia lowered her eyes for a moment, but soon returned to face him. Inside her, something said she couldn't retreat. The memory of Emily's voice, asking to be called princess, burned in her memory. It was then that an intimate truth crossed her thoughts, one of those that seemed to speak not only of history, but of life. Sometimes a single word of love can be stronger than all the medicines in the world, and that's why you should stay with me until the end of this story, because what's about to happen is still going to change everything. Richard got so close that Patricia could feel his breathing, marked by pent-up anger. "You're fired," he threatened, but the sentence was suspended in the air, as if even he was fighting his own emotions. Because behind that fury there was something else, a pain that Patricia began to see, even without wanting to. And the tension turned into a question that hung over both of them. How far would Richard be willing to go to keep his wall of coldness standing? And how far would Patricia have the courage to risk it, to tear down that wall? The room seemed too small to hold so much tension. Richard walked from one side to the other, his firm steps sounding like hammers against the marble floor, while Patricia stood motionless near the sofa, her arms glued to her body, as if any gesture could unleash even more anger. "You've crossed all limits," he snapped, his voice charged with fury. "He invaded a space that is not his. He messed with my daughter's head, as if it was his right to decide what she needs or not." Patricia took a deep breath, her tears wanting to escape, but her voice came out firm, sustained by something greater than fear. "I haven't broken into anything, Mr. Campbell. I only saw one child begging to be loved, and I couldn't turn my back. You can accuse me of everything, but you cannot deny what your own eyes have seen." Emily smiled. For the first time in months, she believed she could still be a princess. Richard stopped, turning sharply to face her. His gaze was sharp, but behind the anger there was something else, a weight that betrayed that his own words no longer supported the mask. "You don't understand anything," he roared. "She doesn't know what it's like to see her daughter waste away day after day, to know that every hair that falls out can be the harbinger of goodbye. He doesn't know what it's like to live with the shadow of death haunting his house." Patricia stepped forward, not realizing that she was daring too much. "I don't know your pain, but I know hers. I know what it means for a child to feel invisible, without affection, without a hug. I know because I lived it myself, and I don't wish it on anyone, least of all for a girl who already faces so much." The silence fell like a heavy curtain. Richard looked away, going to the window, his hands resting on the railing, his shoulders tense as if carrying an impossible weight. His voice came out quieter, almost a whisper that seemed to escape against his will. "Every time I look at her, I see Helena. I see my wife's eyes. I see what I lost in the accident. And every time I see Emily suffer, I feel like I'm going to lose the only thing I have left of her. So I hide, because if I allow myself to feel, I fall apart." Patricia closed her eyes for a moment, absorbing those words. The villain, the man who seemed to be made of ice, finally let out a crack, a gap through which his humanity shone through. When she looked at him again, her voice was soft, but charged with truth. "But don't you understand that if you continue to hide, you are already losing it? Emily doesn't need a perfect man. It needs a father present. She doesn't need you to hide the pain. She needs you to share it with her." Richard squinted, as if those words were knives opening a poorly healed wound. He stood still, his heavy breathing betraying the internal struggle, and then the silence was interrupted by a distant sound, delicate but strong enough to pierce that moment. Emily's crying, muffled upstairs. Patricia felt her chest burn, and Richard closed his eyes as if he didn't have the strength to face his own daughter's call. The conflict was clear. Would he continue to be attached to the armor of coldness, or would he have the courage to break himself to save the one he loved most? Emily walked down the steps in silence, her little feet barely making a sound on the thick carpet of the stairs, but his teary eyes betrayed that he had listened more than he should have. Hidden behind the living room door, she had heard her father's harsh words, the weight of anger, and the revelation that had never been spoken out loud, that he avoided looking at her because every time he saw her face, he remembered his lost mother. The girl clutched the ball doll to her chest as if it were the only company left. A sob escaped her lips and echoed down the hallway, catching the attention of Richard and Patricia. He turned quickly and found his daughter there, motionless, her eyes full of tears. "Emily," he murmured, his voice cracking for the first time in a long time. The child, with the frankness that only the little ones possess, asked between sobs, "Daddy, don't you love me anymore because I'm sick?" The whole room seemed to stop, time suspended, as if even the walls were waiting for the answer. Richard felt the ground disappear under his feet. Her daughter's words crossed all the barriers she had built around her. The heart he swore he had buried with Helena throbbed with pain, begging to be heard. For the first time in months, his eyes filled with tears. He walked over to Emily, but his legs faltered as if every step was a request for forgiveness. He knelt before her, lowering himself to the level of his frailty. Her hands trembled as they touched the girl's thin shoulders. "Emily, you will always be my princess," she said, her voice broken, wet from the tears that flowed uncontrollably. The little girl widened her eyes, as if she couldn't believe it. Then, finally, he threw himself into his father's arms, burying his face in his chest. Their crying mixed, washing away months of silence, distance, and repressed pain. Patricia, standing a few meters away, watched the scene with teary eyes. That hug was the answer Emily had been waiting for so long, the cure that no medicine could offer. For Patricia, there was no greater victory than seeing the ice breaking before her eyes. The mansion, once cold and barren, now seemed to breathe human warmth again. It was as if a door had opened inside Richard's heart, and Emily had been able to walk through to rescue him. Patricia took a deep breath, feeling a relief that ran through her veins like a breath of hope. In the emotion-filled silence, she realized the transformation had begun, but the path still held secrets and challenges that none of them could have foreseen. The following days brought a change that seemed almost impossible weeks ago. Richard, who used to leave early in the morning and only returned late at night, began to reorganize his routine. She cancelled trips, reduced meetings, and, for the first time in a long time, put her daughter at the center of her schedule. Emily was surprised at first, used to the icy distance from her father, but soon her eyes shone again at the news. He would take her to doctor's appointments, sit next to her during exams, and instead of hiding behind reports, hold her small hand firmly, calling her "my brave princess." At the mansion, silence was replaced by laughter. Richard, who had never gone down to the floor to play, suddenly found himself building castles out of colored blocks on the living room carpet, while Emily ran around with her golden wig swaying like the real thing. Patricia watched from afar, the cleaning cloth forgotten in her hands, feeling her chest warm with that transformation that seemed like a miracle. Gradually, she stopped being just an invisible employee and became part of the girl's life, almost like a maternal presence that cradled laughter and wiped tears. The Richard, who had once humiliated mercilessly, now thanked her quietly when she made tea for Emily or helped her change her clothes. It was as if, in the face of pain and rediscovered love, the armor of coldness was unraveling. The mansion, once compared to a mausoleum, now breathed life into every corner, and even the gardens seemed to bloom with more color. But the change that warmed hearts was still no guarantee of peace, because hidden among the business papers that Richard was beginning to neglect was a secret that threatened to shake everything up again, and when it did surface, it would bring a storm that neither of them was prepared to face. The rain beat hard against the windows of the mansion that night, as if the whole sky decided to cry along with the pain stored between those walls. Patricia was finishing collecting some toys from Emily when she heard Richard's voice calling her name. It was not the usual authoritarian tone, but a lower, almost hesitant voice. In the office, he sat at the mahogany table, his hands clasped together, staring at some point as if fighting an invisible battle. When she looked up, Patricia saw in them something she had never seen: vulnerability. "Sit down," he said, pointing to the chair in front. There was a heavy silence before he began. "For months I pretended I didn't feel it. I pretended that distance was strength, that silence was protection. I thought that if I closed myself off, I could endure it better. But I was wrong. I was killing my daughter little by little with my absence." Richard's voice broke, and he had to take a deep breath to continue. "The truth is that I was a coward. I couldn't be strong enough to look at Emily without seeing Helena, and I ended up choosing the easiest path, to escape." Patricia felt her eyes water, not with pity, but with recognition. "I knew what it was like to run away from pain, to swallow feelings to survive." He ran his hands over his face, as if seeking courage. "You did what I couldn't." He brought back her smile, gave her something I had stolen without realizing it, and so, "I don't know how to thank you." Those words, coming from the man who had humiliated her so many times, sounded almost unbelievable. Patricia lowered her eyes. Her heart tightened, but she felt that something bigger was being built there. Richard continued, his voice breaking. "I don't want you to stay here just as an employee. I need you as someone to help me rebuild my daughter's life, as an ally, not as someone invisible, but as part of our home." Patricia took a deep breath, and at that moment she realized that she was not hearing the voice of a powerful boss, but of a desperate father who was finally taking off his armor. There are things that we live and keep, but maybe by telling, we help another heart to breathe. Enjoy this video and subscribe, and let's make this story reach those who need it. Richard waited for his answer, his eyes steady but full of fear. Patricia knew that accepting meant taking on a role that went beyond cleaning. It was putting herself at the center of a broken family. And yet, within her, a flame of courage had been lit long ago. But would the world around us, and fate itself, allow this pact of trust to weather the storms yet to come? The Sunday sun poured in through the mansion's windows, spreading a golden glow over the breakfast table. It was the first time in a long time that this space, once silent and heavy, was full of soft voices and smiles. Emily absent-mindedly bit into a slice of bread, the curls of the wig falling over her eyes as she laughed at something Patricia had just told. Richard watched the scene in silence, as if he couldn't believe how much his life had changed since that simple woman, invisible to the eyes of the world, had walked through his door. Suddenly, he cleared his throat, drawing attention. "Patricia," he began hesitantly, but with a firm look, "I've been thinking a lot, and I think it's time to formalize something. I want to offer her a raise, and not only that, I want her to be permanently by our side, not only as an employee, but as Emily's caregiver, someone I trust more than myself." Patricia was surprised, the fork trembling in her hand. The silence was broken by Emily's sweet and innocent voice, which stared at the cleaning lady with eyes full of hope. "Can you be my mommy too?" The girl's words pierced Patricia like lightning. Time seemed to stop, bringing back memories of her own childhood, the absence of her mother who had left too soon, the days when she wished she had someone to stroke her hair and call her princess. Patricia took a deep breath, her heart pressed between the painful past and the tender present. Emily looked at her as if she depended on that answer to believe in life again. "And maybe you feel it together with Patricia now, that the most remarkable moment in this story is yet to come, and that's why you can't move away, because when a child asks for a mother, it is not just a request, it is a call to the soul." Richard looked away, embarrassed, as if he too was waiting for an answer that could redefine everything. Patricia held the girl's hand gently, but inside she knew that taking on this role was much more than a gesture of affection. It would be facing secrets, judgments, and consequences that were still hidden along the way. And the question that was suspended in the air was inevitable. How far would life allow this new family to become real? It took Patricia a few days to respond to the request, but when she finally agreed to stay by Emily's side permanently, something inside her also changed. The small house in Newark, with its bills piled up and its nights of loneliness, now seemed a distant chapter in a life that was no longer the same. The Campbell mansion, which had once choked her with its icy silence, now had the sounds of hurried footsteps, childlike laughter, and simple conversations that filled the hallways like music. Emily ran around the house, her blonde wig swinging, calling Patricia to play house or to listen to stories made up on the spot. Richard, who had never interrupted a meeting for any reason before, now allowed himself to sit on the floor with the two of them, helping to put together puzzles or just watching with a suppressed smile his daughter transform before his eyes. Gradually, Patricia stopped being seen as the employee and became an indispensable presence, almost like the beating heart of that house. Richard, in discreet gestures, revealed even deeper changes. He held the chair for Patricia to sit on, asked if she had already eaten, offered a cup of coffee when the days were too long. There was an unprecedented softness in his eyes, as if the wall of ice had finally cracked. Emily realized before anyone else she was the one who took Patricia's hand and placed it next to her father's, laughing, as if she wanted to seal a fate that was already written in her child's heart. And Patricia, although she still struggled with the memories of the hard life she had had, began to believe that perhaps it was possible finally to be respected, valued, and truly loved. But fate, so quick to open doors, also knows how to hide them with dangerous secrets, and the approaching shadow promised to endanger not only the newfound peace, but also the fragile bond of love that was beginning to be born inside that house. The garden lights were on, reflecting softly on the manicured trees and the impeccable lawn. A long table covered with a white tablecloth and flower arrangements brought together few of Richard's intimate guests. Business colleagues, neighbors, friends who had never seen this man so different. The night air was fresh, and the smell of roses mingled with the aroma of the dishes served. Patricia, in her simple but carefully chosen dress, felt out of place among such elegant people. Still, he remained by Emily's side, who did not let go of her hand even for a moment. The girls smiled with the same intensity as someone who finally had a safe place to call home. When the plates were picked up and silence was made, Richard stood up. His voice, firm but charged with emotion, broke the night. "I want to say a few words. For a long time, I believed that I could face my pain alone. I believed that hardening was the only way to survive. But what I discovered is that silence does not protect, it destroys." People exchanged surprised looks, accustomed to hearing only cold business speeches coming from him. Richard took a deep breath and continued, "If today my daughter smiles again, if she has come back to believe that she can still be a princess, it is because someone had the courage to do what I did not have. Patricia is not just the woman who cleans my house. She's the woman who saved my daughter. And in a way, it saved me too." Patricia felt the tears fill her eyes, but she stood firm. The heart seemed to beat too loudly, as if everyone could hear. Emily, excited, let go of her chair and ran to her father, hugging him by the waist. With the innocence that only children carry, he announced loudly, "Now I have a real family." The girls' spontaneous laughter filled the garden, drawing discreet applause from the guests. Patricia looked at Richard, and at that moment, without needing words, she understood that the respect that had always been denied her had finally arrived. But even at the height of tenderness, there was something more in Richard's eyes, a restrained glow that seemed to herald a next step, something that would change the destinies of everyone at that table even more. The night was charged with hope, but also with an undisclosed promise, and the question that hung in the air was, what would be the next courage that Richard would be ready to declare before everyone? The autumn sun illuminated Central Park, painting the trees in shades of gold and red, as Emily ran among the dry leaves with the lightness of someone who had finally regained her stolen childhood. In her hand, she held the wig that had once been a shield against pain, and in a gesture full of courage, threw it to the wind, laughing loudly as the blonde strands spread through the air like loose petals. Richard and Patricia walked side by side, holding hands, watching the scene with teary eyes, but this time not of sadness, but of gratitude. The cold millionaire had discovered the value of being a father. The girl had learned that being a princess was a matter of love and not of appearance, and Patricia, the invisible cleaning lady, now walked with dignity, recognized not only as an employee, but as an essential part of a new family. This story reminds us that life can be hard, but the courage to love and stand up in the face of injustice always opens paths to transformation. How many times have we ourselves been invisible, carrying pain in silence until someone saw our value? If this reflection touched you, know that your company here was like a gift. Thank you so much for staying with me until the end. Your like is like a hug that warms up and supports the channel. Your subscription is an invitation to come back and have the next coffee with me. And tell me which city you are watching from, because I really want to know how far this story has come. Also, activate the bell so you don't lose when the coffee is ironed again. Don't go away yet. Listen to the next true story that will appear on the screen. Always remember, each story carries a strength. Watch the next video here on the channel with another incredible story.